Good afternoon, colleagues and friends. My name's Monique Earsman and I'm honoured to serve as the Executive Director of Catholic Social Services Australia. In partnership with Catholic Social Services Victoria, I'm excited to welcome you to the first of our webinar series, designed to explore some of the key issues around the proposed Indigenous Voice to Parliament. Today, as we gather virtually, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which I live, work and raise a family, the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and offer respect to the custodians of the land from which you join us. Following my introduction, I'll hand over to Cherie Balcombe, and she will, the Manager of Aboriginal Catholic Ministry Victoria, to provide a more fulsome acknowledgement of country. Today's webinar is the first of 3 sessions planned in the lead up to the referendum later this year. It's a timely date to start the series, given tomorrow is National Sorry Day and National Reconciliation Week begins on Saturday. The next session will feature Father Frank Brennan on 29 June, and the third on the 27th of July will feature a panel of First Nations leaders. That will include Uncle Ron Briggs, Auntie Violet Sheridan and Esme Manahan. I encourage you to register for the other sessions if you haven't already. I'll now hand over to Cherie Balcombe for the Acknowledgement of Country. Cherie is a proud Yanji, Jabbergai, Okla woman, and I know I've mispronounced that, originally from far north Queensland. She's a current member of the Council of Catholic Social Services Victoria and has made a significant contribution to the committee work over the years. And for almost 20 years, Cherie has played an important role in the Aboriginal Catholic ministry in the Archdiocese of Melbourne. Over to you, Cherie.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'd like us all to just take a breath and place ourselves in country. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands for which the First Nations people and their ancestors have been custodians for thousands and thousands of years, on which we've performed age-old ceremonies, celebrations, initiations, and renewals. We commit ourselves to live on the land. We commit ourselves to the land that we live in. We will care for it with gentleness, patience, simplicity, and compassion, rather than merely seeing it as something to be brought and sold. We see the land as a gift, which is we are truly thankful for. Aboriginal people are the original custodians of this land, and for many years that knowledge has been neglected and derided. It is vitally important to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, to enable the community to share our Aboriginal culture and heritage, facilitating respect and better relationships between First Nations people and all Australians. We pay our respects to the elders, past and present, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture, and the hopes of Aboriginal people Australia-wide. We remember that under the concrete and asphalt, this land always was, always will be, traditional Aboriginal land, and others dreaming. And so thank you today for being here. I think it's very heartening to see so many people that want to hear, and we want to share with you. So I'm very, very grateful that you're here tonight, and I welcome you to these discussions. And please don't let this be the end, just let this be the beginning. I'm very much looking forward to creating the new Australia with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Cherie. Friends, I'm pleased to kickstart our webinar series by introducing our first speaker, Professor Melissa Castan. Professor Castan is the Director of the Castan Centre for Human Rights Law and holds the position of Associate Dean in the Law Faculty at Monash University in Melbourne. Melissa's perspective is particularly noteworthy given her own background. Her family were refugees who fled persecution in Eastern Europe, seeking safety and the promise of a fresh start in Australia, which they told was a new nation. This personal connection fuels her dedication to the cause of human rights. Melissa is a legal academic working in the realms of human rights, public and constitutional law, focusing on opportunities for the recognition and implementation of proper legal relations with First Nations people. She's a fellow of the Australian Academy of Law and is committed to advancing social justice through law reform and legal education in Australia. Please join me in warmly welcoming Professor Melissa Castan.
Thank you so much, Monique, and thank you, Sherry, for your warm welcome and acknowledgement. I'd also like to thank Peter and the team today for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. I'm very grateful for all of you in the audience who have joined us and for taking time out of your day to listen to me. I usually speak to law students and they're obliged to listen to me, so it's always very gratifying when people have actually decided to come along and hear me of their own volition. I do want to start today acknowledging the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nations as the traditional owners and of the custodians of the land that I'm joining you from today. And I want to acknowledge the traditional owners' continuing relationship today to the land, to the waters and to the law and the continuing fight for justice in this country. I want to pay respect to elders past and present, and I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome any First Nations people who are joining us. I wanted to make the observation that all of us here have a context and a values-based approach to our work. We work where we work for a reason. And I think that because of that, we have an important role to play in addressing the dispossession caused and the continuing impact of what I sometimes call Captain Cook's law in Australia, meaning the Anglo-Australian legal system that started with the Captain Cook story and continues today. But it's over 30 years since the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody was handed down its final report and told us the truth about what's happening in incarceration places. It's over 30 years since the High Court handed down the judgment in the Mabo case and told us the truth about Aboriginal and Torres Strait connection to land and the ongoing cultural and legal relationships there. And it's over 25 years since the Bringing Them Home report was handed down by Sir Ronald Wilson and Professor Mick Dodson and told us the truth about how children are separated from families and the impact that has on culture and family life and kinship. And these episodes or landmarks in our Australian narrative are key steps for us in the national journey from what I've told you is what I've called Captain Cook's law to what I'd like to see as the restoration of proper legal relations between First Nations and the settler state of Australia. So those important reports or findings were really important in telling part of our national story. But I'm particularly looking forward to the next step in this journey of telling our national story, and that's this referendum and the implementation of a voice to Parliament at the federal level. And it's my hope that as a community, and particularly the communities that we work in, that we can really contribute actively and very intentionally to that legal and political form, which is forming that next step in this journey or in this pathway. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about some of the legal context for the Voice to Parliament proposition and the referendum. But I'm not really engaging so much with the moral or philosophical arguments, and I'm sure that you're going to have those conversations yourselves in your workplace and when you hear from some of the seminar speakers in the next series. Because I'm a legal educator, I tend to talk a lot about the law, and I'm going to try and not be too complicated or legalistic because I know that'll drive everyone to turn off. So I'm all right explaining complicated things in a very straightforward and clear way. But I do want, if you have questions about what I'm saying or things are not clear to you, jot them down or put them in the chat box so that we can come back when I've finished giving my sort of overview words and you can ask me to clarify things more. I'd be very happy to. So I want to start with the question of where does the voice proposal come from and why do we need a voice to Parliament? And I want to take you right back to 1768. Why? Because that's when the adventurer Captain James Cook, who we're all familiar with, was given instructions for his first Pacific voyage, and he was given a set of secret instructions to go and find a continent or land of great extent that was thought to exist in the Southern Hemisphere. And he did, in fact, find the territory that we now call Australia. But he was specifically ordered to take possession of that country with the consent of the natives. And I use that term because that's the term that his instructions used. Now, those instructions that were issued to Captain Cook represent the first English statement of legal interest in the territory that we now call Australia. And they record and they exemplify that British quest for scientific exploration and the search for exploitable resources and the expansion of Britain's control, either in political terms or economic terms. And they represent the colonial enterprise. And they're probably the first expression of what we call Australia's public law, because you're actually getting a lawful instruction to go off and do something and take possession of the territory. But we know that Captain Cook did not discover Australia. He might have thought he did, but there were, of course, multiple nations, tribes, clans living in Australia. And when Captain Cook made the claim of possession of New South Wales, he didn't do that with the consent of those Indigenous nations that populated the east coast that Cook travelled up and down. Cook and his successor, Governor Phillip, and all of their legal successors asserted claims over the territory, over the lands, the waters, but they took no particular attention or concern for engaging in proper legal relations with any of those hundreds of different tribal nations who did in fact have legal and practical sovereignty over the territory for tens of thousands of years. And the interesting anomaly in Australia, I think, is that at the same time that Cook was making those assertions and Phillip was making those assertions and all their successors were making those assertions, they were negotiating with the tribes and nations of New Zealand, Canada, of North America. So Australia is a very strange story in this engagement between the British and the peoples of Australia, because something happened that was really different here from the same kind of engagement that was happening with what I call our common law cousins, you know, our cousins that all had the same British heritage that we did. And that sets in place a really deep fracture or fault line in Australian law. And sometimes, and later on, that fault line was described as a legal fiction of terra nullius. Well, Cook didn't exactly use the term terra nullius, but that's the term that we've come to use to explain it. But that legal fiction or that fault line imagined that Australia was unoccupied before Cook arrived, or before Phillip came with the first fleet. And that fault line is really saying that a whole lot of people were invisible in the Australian law. And that fault line existed all the way through a great arc of history, sort of going from the 1768 or 1788 right through time, not corrected in 1901 when we had federation, and not really corrected in 1967 when we had another referendum to try and bring greater recognition of Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people into the Constitution. And the only time it's really sort of forcefully or intentionally addressed is in the Mabo case in 1992. And in that case, Justice Brennan, who was the lead judge, says, whatever the justification advanced in earlier years for refusing to recognise the rights and interests of land of the Indigenous inhabitants of settled colonies, an unjust and discriminatory doctrine of that kind can no longer be accepted. And so the High Court and the majority of the High Court agreed with Justice Brennan, rejected that legal fiction that Australia was practically unoccupied before 1788. And they went in place and put in place some legal principles and common law about how we could recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander property rights that existed not as a matter of Australian law, not even as a matter of British law. They actually existed as a matter of Indigenous law pre-Cook. And that's really what native title is. It's the recognition that people had existing rights to property pre-Cook. But there is this other element of the Mabo case that I think we don't always think about coherently, and that is it's actually talking about the way Australia was settled and the way the Australian law recognises different manifestations or different expressions or different legal cultures. And in that sense, it's not really just about property law. It's actually about addressing this fault line that's travelling through history. And because that fault line has never been properly addressed, that was one case, but it didn't really speak to the Constitution, the Big C Constitution exactly. Because it's never properly addressed, the enduring impacts of not properly engaging with people, not taking their status and their standing as legitimate, not engaging with them fulsomely in the political debate, it's had enduring impacts and many, many dire consequences for people, for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And those dire consequences and dire impacts have not really been properly addressed. I think that part of the reason why we haven't been able to properly address those consequences is because the Australian nation has not yet found a way to really engage with, recognise, include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our constitutional, in our legal, in our political functioning. And because of that lack of engagement, we're not listening. We're not listening to what Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people are telling us about what's needed. We're not listening to how they're telling us they need to be addressed or governed or dealt with. And so our political system and our legal system and many of our social systems don't adequately listen to what Indigenous people are telling us. So now we have this opportunity that's brought about to change that lack of hearing, to change that omission, and to listen properly to what Aboriginal people want us to do. And there's been broad Indigenous community consultations that led to the Uluru Statement of the Heart. There's been numerous Australian parliamentary committees inquiries. There's been a number of affirmative statements by governments at different levels in Australia. There's been many lawmakers who have said they're in favour of the voice. We've got multiple civil society organisations endorsing it, and even private sector organisations, sporting clubs, faith organisations, multicultural communities. All of these people have contributed to a proposal that is to have an Indigenous-led advisory body that's put in place into our political and legal system. And that advisory body will be known as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. That's what the Voice is. And that advisory body will be included into the Constitution by way of a referendum. Why? Why by way of a referendum? Why do we have to have a referendum? Because the only way you can change our Constitution is by having a referendum. The drafters of our Constitution made it so difficult to change the Constitution, you couldn't change it by accident. You have to change it with the people's vote. And so that's what we're being asked to do. So why is there a request for a voice? Why is it that the voice, an advisory body, is being asked for? Some people ask for other things as well. There's a lot of talk about treaty. There's a lot of talk about truth. But the Uluru Statement and the dialogues that led to it and the consultations and the discussions specifically invite us to think about the voice as part of a trio of reforms. And that's explained in brief as voice, treaty, truth. So the voice is the first stage in a process. But why did Aboriginal people ask for a voice? Why did they want to engage at this level and ask for this type of reform? And I want to read you just out a paragraph from the Uluru Statement to give you some context for this. So in the Uluru Statement, which you'll see in the next couple of days, there'll be quite a lot of attention on it because of the celebrations and observations and commemorations this week. In the Uluru Statement, in the middle, it says this: proportionately, we are the most incarcerated people in the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them, and our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis plainly tell the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. We have the power over our destiny. Our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds and their culture will be a gift to the community. So you can see that the Uluru Statement actually articulates why a voice is so important in order to address the structural nature of the problem. And the voice then sets up a kind of body and a representative coming together that will then be the stepping stone to some other things that are in the Uluru Statement, treaty processes, which, as we've seen in Victoria, is really just a process of agreement making with Indigenous people, but at a proper level, in a proper format, and truth telling, which also in Victoria, we are now going through that process by the work of the Yuruk Justice Commission. And we're seeing police commissioners and heads of departments and people in the health sector coming forward to that Truth Commission and talking very honestly and frankly about what some of the failings of the past have been and what some of the repair and the improvements could be for the future. And the closing line of the Uluru Statement is very moving, and it says, in 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. And so it's the reason why we are looking at a voice, and we have a proposal for the voice, is because of this invitation that's come from Indigenous people to us as part of the mainstream operating systems of the country, and asked us to repair the fault line. We can't go back into history and undo the mistakes, but we can work now from the present and into the future in a very constructive way. And as somebody was saying before, we've tried a lot of different things to support Indigenous people and to repair some of the damage that's happened. And we've not been very successful at doing that. So why would we keep doing the same thing over and over? Why would we keep making the same mistakes over and over? It's really time to try a new format and a new engagement that will support real self-determination for people and real engagement in the political and legal processes. So I think that it just, to close off my sort of monologue here, is that as a representative and advisory body, I think the voice can be understood as embedding a very genuine form of legal recognition and a very genuine form of political relationship building between Indigenous communities and the nation state, the state of Australia. And the very point of that recognition and the very point of a voice is to stop Indigenous people from being controlled and coerced unilaterally by the state, and instead shift the relationship into multilateral relationships, and to move from a majoritarian type of agenda into a consultative and participatory type of agenda. And I think that's very important, not just for First Nations people or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I actually think it's fundamental to Australia as a whole in the national interest and as a constitutional democracy. So I'll stop talking now for a bit and let you ask me some questions, or Sherry, you might want to respond to what I've said so far.
Thank you, Professor Castan, for your presentation this afternoon. I'll now invite Sherry Balcombe to respond and provide any further commentary on the issues raised in the presentation. Thank you.
I thought that was great. It was wonderful to hear a different perspective, and I think that's the kind of perspective that that the community are looking for. You know, we want to hear answers. We want to hear, you know, there's a lot of, I think, white noise going on that people don't really understand. And so it's about time we had a bit of clarity around what it does actually mean for us. And for us, I think it's exactly right. We don't have a voice in our own country. You know, we need to be at the table that are making decisions about our communities. We were talking earlier about, you know, closing the gap. The gap's getting bigger. The government's been throwing billions of dollars at the closing the gap, and it's not changing anything for us. And so we need to do something different. And I think the Uluru Statement is so eloquent. It's beautiful. You know, it's an invitation to the Australian people. Please walk with us. Join us on this journey. You have nothing to lose. You're going to gain 60,000 years of, you know, of culture, of pride. So, you know, I think we're in an incredible time in Australia's history, and we're about to change the tapestry of this country for all time. You know, it'd be wonderful for the next generation of Australians to be able to be proud of their Aboriginal culture and to be able to share that. I think when Noel Pearson, you know, in one of his quotes, and he says there, you know, Aboriginal people, you know, the community doesn't really think much. We seem to be the problem. You know, very few know us, and even fewer can call us friends. And so, you know, we're opening up and we're saying, please join us on this journey. This is the first step. And, you know, we have 54 countries in the Commonwealth. We are the only ones without a treaty. And so I think we have a long way to go. And this is, you know, it is about my ancestors who have, they've survived for us to be here today. They've survived incredible hardships. And it's amazing that we have survived, but we are here. And it's also about my grandchildren and their grandchildren. You know, we do want our culture to be a gift to this country. We want everybody to be proud that they live in the country with the longest continuous culture on the planet, you know, and we want everybody to share in it. And I hope that, you know, we can continue to have some good information being shared so that people can make informed decisions. And I think for me, the informed decisions, you know, are things, what would Jesus do? You know, what would Jesus do in this situation? You know, the last thing we want is another tier of government. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. I'll now go to a few of the questions that have come in from the audience. And this question could possibly be answered by either Sherry or Melissa, but I'm confused about the fractures or various arguments from within the Indigenous community that have publicly said they'll say no. Why would they do this if it's such a good thing? So they're seeking to understand why there are First Nations people saying no, and is there a better or different way?
I'm happy to answer that. Look, I have just come back from spending 3 months in Cairns with my family. My family's from Cape York, and a lot of the people up there are just so disheartened. We've had so many things that, you know, the government have put onto us. You know, and ATSIC was a prime example how it was set up, and it was set up to fail. It wasn't going to, and that's from other political people can tell you that. You know, you just have to Google it and have a look at it. It was not set up so that it could be successful. And of course, when it failed, it was Aboriginal people's fault that it failed. But you know, we're at this time, you know, I think the Uluru Statement saying about, you know, we do need a voice in our country. You know, in 1967, we were counted. You know, 2023, we're seeking to be heard. And I really don't think that a voice I can't see the problem with letting Aboriginal people have a voice in the say of their communities. We're not asking to, you know, and it won't have anything legal. So it's going to be, you know, it's about communities, you know, the Makarrata coming together after a struggle. And let's sit down and talk about this. How can we come to a compromise that, you know, something that will work well for the government, but something that works well for Aboriginal people? You know, our children, you know, we've got more children in out-of-home care now than we did when they did the Bringing Them Home report in 1997. Our incarceration rates are appalling. Even in Victoria, in Northern Territory, our children in jail are 99.9% of the population. Don't worry, in Victoria, we're 2% of the population in Victoria, but we're over 40% population in the jail, in the children's jail. There's something vastly wrong. There's vastly, you know, and it's that thing about putting your hand in the fire and expecting something different to happen. We have to do something different for things to change for our people. And the only way that I can see is that if we have a voice around that table that are making decisions, you know, and that they can talk with good faith, with open hearts and open minds, that we can sit down and we can have adult, mature conversations about how we can make a difference to our people.
Would you mind if I added another comment to add to you?
And
thank you very much for the question. It's a really good question because
Yes.
it is kind of confusing for people who aren't in the Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander community to understand why people are, why there's some dissent there. And Sherry's given some good examples why people feel disheartened and feel like they don't really trust government process very much. And so they might feel like, well, why do I say yes to something when there's been many things before and there'll probably be many things afterwards, and, you know, what difference will it make? So there's a little bit of sort of loss of faith in the system, and I really can't blame anyone for feeling a loss of faith in the system because the system hasn't served them very well so far. But what I would like to say from a non-Indigenous point of view, and I think this will speak to you and this cohort, is that we actually don't expect uniformity in any of our cultural, social or political groupings that we have. It's really common. If I said to you guys, or, you know, you're having a debate about a particular topic, I don't know what the topics might be, there would for sure be a range of people who are saying, yeah, I agree with it, I'm vehemently in favour, I'm vehemently not in favour, I'm vehemently confused. You know, there would be a range of views in any organisation or any community or any broad sector of the community. And I'm a member of the Jewish community. I can assure you, we don't agree on anything. Right? We barely agree on anything. And even if when we agree, we sort of disagree in the way that we agree. And that might be a strength or a weakness, I'm not sure. But the statistics, the data that they've done on the polling show that more than 80% of Indigenous people actually are in favour of the voice. That's a very strong majority from a community, and from actually many communities, not one Aboriginal people or one Torres Strait Islander people, it's many, many different communities. And to have more than 80% of people saying we actually believe in this process and we think it's going to have better outcomes for us, to me is really important. But just to get down to some nitty gritty, if I might, and Sherry, you might correct me if I'm taking a wrong turn here. There are some specific Indigenous advocates who are very well represented in the media. They have a big stature in the media, and they're very loudly saying no. Some of them are saying no because they're saying it's not good enough. Yeah, sure, a voice would be nice, but I want a treaty, or I want something much bigger than even that. I want something even more grand than that. And that's a valid argument to say. The voice is only one part in a process. So it's fair enough to say the voice isn't enough. But it is the thing we've got on the table right now that has political willpower behind it, that has community willpower around. And I'm not really clear on why a person would say, well, I won't take that because it's not as good as I want it to be. I'll just wait 30 or 50 years for something better to come. Waiting isn't going to do it. And in fact, if I could think, you know, to be really politically sort of a political take on it, is if this referendum votes no and we don't get the voice up, there will be no treaty and truth-telling processes. There will be no political willpower or appetite for any other reforms. People will just go, oh, look, you know, we tried and Australia doesn't want to have those reforms. So we actually lose the political moment if we don't have a yes. But there's some other people in different Indigenous people in other sectors who are not saying it's not enough. They're just saying, oh, it's just political. It's just a thing for them. It's not a thing for us. And I'm not really sure whether those, and Sherry, this is why I'm saying I welcome your comment. I'm not really sure whether those are really heartfelt views or they're just political statements that people are making for their own reasons. And then, as Sherry said, there's some communities that are just so locked out of engagement and participation that they don't really see what the value of some political processes or legal processes are, because they've been so dispossessed and so disparaged for so long. You know, if they were given poison flower in 1820 by the government, then the story is, well, I don't really want anything from this government. I don't really want to engage with this government. This government's always just given us poison stuff, right? Now, I know I'm not being flippant, but I'm saying that the history is, you've never given us very much of value, so why do I want the thing that you're giving me now? It's probably, not the thing. So there's I've raised a few different arguments there, but the main thing I will say to you is, do you guys all agree when there's a novel proposition put before you, or do you have to, debate and some don't? Anyway, I'll hand to Sherry.
And look, I think that's a very valid question for people that don't know. You know, we have over 300 countries in Australia. You know, put that in your mind, 300 countries. Now, nobody would ever ask Europe to come together with one statement and be one people. So it is unreasonable to ask us to come together as one people, because we are different countries. You know, it's anybody that's looked at the Aboriginal map, every colour is a different country, and we're sovereign countries of that colour of that land, and we are also a democracy. We're a democracy. Of course we don't agree on everything. That is the beauty of us, that we are all so different, and we all come from very different backgrounds, histories, experiences. We bring all that with us. Our strengths, our brokenness, we bring all that with us. So part of that is with it. And we do have, look, and I totally agree about, we have some people, look, we need radicals. We do need radicals. But I think to tear up the Constitution and start again, that's not happening. It's not going to happen. It's a great dream. For us as Aboriginal people, that'd be a great dream. Let's tear up the Constitution and start again, and do it as one Australia. But we have an opportunity right now. This is the opportunity that we're knocking on the door, and here is an opportunity for us to have a voice in discussions about our place in Australia, about our movement forward as a peoples. And it is the only opportunity that we have. We have nothing else, and it's all right for people to say, oh, this is my own opinion. It's all right for people to say, oh, no, but we're not getting anything, so I don't want anything. Well, I do. I want a treaty for my children. I want a treaty for my grandchildren. And the only way we're going to get a treaty is if we have a voice. And it's, Ullarue's statement, voice, truth and treaty. And I think, and the truth is very, very important, because we have this hidden history, our frontier wars, the massacres, this terrible, terrible history that happened. We have stolen generation that is not 100 years ago. It's 50 years ago. 50 years ago was, and up until 1973, we still had the White Australia policy in this country. So, and I think often when I go and do talks and things, and I talk to students, and where they talk about, the 60s and how Australia was, we were the free and loving, and, it was all, everyone was free, and it was the real happy time, and the Mardi Gras, and, but our people weren't free in the 60s. We were still under segregation, and these issues haven't been addressed. And to me, it's like, well, it's like Australia has this big wound. There's a big wound. If we don't talk about it and we don't look at it and we just leave it in the corner, then it doesn't exist. But the wound is festering. We need to rip the Band-Aid off. We need to air it out. We need to do the truth telling. We need to clean it out and start again. Let's heal together as a nation. Come together as a nation and let's move forward. I hope that my grandchildren, they can look back and they can say we're proud of that our Australia stood up and they voted to change things in this country. We have been asking for change for over 100 years, and particularly even treaty, that's back in the 80s, we were asking for treaty then, and I remember the government then, we had this scare campaigning about, they're going to come and take your backyard. Well, nobody's backyard's going anywhere. As soon as we started to talk about the voice, the government comes out and the first thing they said is they want another tier of government. Way to scare the people. The last thing Aboriginal people want is another tier of government. We've got too much government. And I think another issue that gets brought up a lot is, but we've got a lot of Aboriginal people that are in Parliament. Those people that are in Parliament have been voted in by their constituents. They haven't been voted in by Aboriginal people. Well, they might be Aboriginal people in the area that they've come from, but they haven't specifically been voted in as an Aboriginal representative. They're there to take care of their constituents. So, they aren't representing all of us. I have there's people that are in Parliament that certainly don't represent me. Jacinta Price is one of them. She doesn't represent me. And it's easy to sit back and say, oh, it's not enough, it's not enough. But when you've got nothing, at least if we've got a voice, we've got something to negotiate with. At the moment, we have nothing. Are Australians proud of that? That they're First Nations people, the longest continuous people on the planet, still have a tent embassy. We still have a tent embassy to today. It's at the back of old Parliament House. We don't have a voice in our country. And for me, I think it's a matter of justice. It's not like, and it's not like we're going to get this voice and then that's it. We've got all these powers. We're going to be piling up the courts. We're going to be stopping legislation going through. And it's not going to be that because we don't have that power. But at least let us have a voice so that we can contribute to the conversations around our people and that we can try and because we're the ones that need to make the changes. Self-determination. That's what self-determination is, letting us make the decisions about our communities. So thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. That was amazing. Thank you. Another further question, this is probably one for Melissa. What are the legal implications of saying yes to the voice? Will we face endless court cases as a result?
Okay, so there's a long answer and a short answer. The short answer is there's no implications of saying yes in legal terms, and there's no reason to expect there'll be endless court cases. It's the amendment into the Constitution is to just put in the advisory body that's called the voice. And that's all the amendment does for the Constitution. So it doesn't create any constitutional ripples or consequences. It just says there's going to be an extra bit. It's left with Parliament to work out how that bit works, right? So will it have 24 people or 36 people or 3 people? Or will it sit in 3-year terms or 7-year terms or 6-month terms? Will it talk about this range of topics or that range of topics? All of the machinations of how the voice body will work will be decided by Parliament, and Parliament retains the entire supremacy and sovereignty over the construction of the voice. It's actually a very legally modest proposal, and it doesn't create any expectation of there being endless court cases. I'm not saying there'll never be any court cases. There's always court cases about any things that are in about constitutional law. There's probably maybe 6 constitutional law cases, sometimes 8, a year at the moment, okay? So most cases before the High Court about very, very uncontroversial things to the rest of us, but sometimes they're about laws of equitable commercial contracts or ministerial responsibilities, right? There's all sorts of cases that go before the High Court. There's usually 6 to 8 constitutional cases. So I don't think we have to have any fears. Now, sometimes I say, trust me, because I'm a constitutional law professor and they pay me to actually work this stuff out. So I just say, you know what, you're going to, without going into the legal arguments, why you just have to trust me. But I don't even have to say that, because if the Attorney General and the Solicitor General and the former Chief Justice of the High Court all say that it presents no legal threat and no legal ramifications, I'm really happy with that level of support, right? Like, that's the kind of people who are very conventional, they're not radicals, they're not activist, and they're all saying this is a very safely constructed, modest proposal with no particular constitutional consequences. So short of me going into the whole analysis of the second reading speech and how we do constitutional interpretation and, you know, the purposive approach and all of those things, which I don't think most of you know, yeah, it doesn't really have very much significance at all. And it's nothing, you know, I sort of say to people, I said, my sister said, but what is it? What is it? I said, have you heard of the Law Reform Commission? She said, yes. I said, have you heard of the Productivity Commission? She said, yes. I said, have you heard of the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare Data? And she said, yes. I said, well, it's that, but for Indigenous policy. That's what it is. And that's people go, oh, okay, it's an advisory body that takes best practice evidence. The evidence will come from Indigenous participatory groups and puts that correct evidence before Parliament. So they're not just making stuff up and working off anecdotes and people who say stuff. That doesn't seem very threatening to me.
Thank you. That's very reassuring.
And can I just add to that too? You know, I think for Aboriginal people that are against it, well, that's fine. But if you don't like what's being said, step up, stand up and show up. You know, for those Aboriginal people, if they say, well, I don't like what's happening in there, then step up, stand up and show up. You know, stand up and put yourself on, be elected and become a representative. And we will be having elections within the community. And I think that's very important, because we need to hear from the grassroots community, because they're the ones that the laws are affecting. And I have said that to other brothers and sisters, you know, when things have come up about that, and I've said, well, if you don't like what's being said, then you step up, stand up and show up. And because it's easy to throw rocks, it's easy to, you know, pull an arrow out and let it go. But it's a lot harder to stand up there and try and make changes for our people. And that's what this is about. This is about changing things for those in our community that need people to have a voice for them. Thank you.
I think we've got time for one final question. One of the questions put was, how can we be allies to combat the negative comments on social media that target people like Stan Grant? It seems people who make racist comments get a large platform on social media, but hopefully they aren't actually representative of the community.
I don't spend a lot of time arguing with people who are outright racist or saying outright outrageous things. I've got a lot of people who I need to talk to who are genuinely concerned and genuinely interested to find out more information. So I spend very little time answering what I'll call haters, right? I don't have an official term for it, but you know, there's only limited value in speaking to someone who's genuinely offensive. And the other thing I want to add, and Stan Grant will be okay, and he has a great support network, and his community will support him, and his journalist community will support him. He's going to be okay. There is a place for, if you're in a Facebook group, you know, it's the you know, the greyhound racing group, or the, you know, the bowls club, or whatever it is, to rebut incorrect things if you feel you want to. But if you feel that that's too unpleasant or exposing for you, you're not obliged to answer every crazy thing that people say, and it can be harming to yourself to get into arguments with people in your community when it's not going anywhere. What I will say is that there are people who deliberately derail people with good intention and spend a lot of time on social media just batting back and forth like a ping pong match. And it's basically to exhaust you and to stop you from talking to someone who you genuinely might need to talk to. You might want to talk to your sister-in-law. You might need to sit down with your sister-in-law and have a cup of coffee and speak to her for an hour and a half. If you're on Facebook arguing with, you know, whoever it is, anonymous, you are just wasting emotional energy and your actual time on someone who knows that they don't care. You're never going to convince them, and they don't care that you're giving them reasonable, coherent arguments. So, and it's up to you. You know that you don't want to have enemies in your community groups where you are, but you are welcome to post legitimate stuff if you need to counter and just say, you know, like, I've got this book, which is fantastic. And say, oh, I've seen this on groups that I'm on, which is, you know, like all sorts of groups about, you know, crafts or dogs or whatever it is. And I've seen people post this and say, I found this very useful. You might find it useful. The person who was racist or offensive will not read this book. Don't worry. But the other people in the group may read it or pick it up. It's $12 in your local bookshop or on Amazon. They will read it, and you've countered that racist discourse in a different way. The only thing I will say is that there are a number of members of parliament from opposition or from conservative politics who are writing outright untruths about The Voice and saying, oh, it's going to mean, you know, 50% of our tax is going to go to Aboriginal people, or, oh, it's going to mean that there's going to be such a, sorry, Sherry, you know, crazy stuff. But I can write this, you might not want to, and I just write, that is blatantly untrue. I don't engage, I just write, that's blatantly untrue, because it is untrue. So there's a lot of fake stuff on Facebook, I notice, but I can do that. That's all right. It's my job. I can say that it's untrue. So I hope that's an answer. Sherry, you get the last word.
Oh, look, I've heard it all. You know, we get free houses, free cars, even free dog registrations, which is not true, by the way. No, we don't get anything free. We don't, you know, everything. We don't get anything free, but there is this big myth out there that we get all this free stuff, and I was thinking about social media. I remember on Australia Day, there was a great post, and it was busting the myths, and so it was about Australia Day, and there was about 10 or 15 points on there, and so I actually posted on my local community website, and it was funny. I think I had about 4 people out of close to 300 that were vicious, and they just kept like, and I just thought I just disengage, because there's no way they have got those views and they're not going to change them. So I'm not wasting my energy. I refuse to get dragged into that kind of stuff. I actually had my son stand up at one time, and on Facebook there, and went, no, you can't say that. But I just think it's not worth the while. As you said, you're better off talking to your friend, to your sister-in-law. Talk to those people. Don't waste your energy on people that are not going to change, and they're looking for someone to have an argument with it about. So I just hope that I hope today has been informative for people. It has been informative for me. For me, I like to hear about the law side of stuff, because I sort of know about the personal, the heart and soul stuff of this discussion. So it's good to hear the law stuff, that we do have that fear mongering out there, which is that's part of the it's part of the game of let's discredit them, let's put all the the shadows in the corner. And then you'll get those people that are sitting on the fence and they don't really want to vote yes. And so they hear those. So they say, no, well, I'm not going to do that because, you know, I've heard all these nasty things. Well, you know, if they really want to know, they'll do some poking around on Google. Google is magnificent. It's got answers to everything. And there's lots of information there. And one of the best things that you can do, you know, knowledge is power. Educate yourselves. If people can just educate themselves, and imagine if you're your family or Aboriginal and you've got heritage going back in this country, you know, 40 grandfathers, how you would feel, and what would you do? And also, and I really like the one about what would Jesus do? You know, we've got a lot of Catholic organisations here, and you know, we're on about Catholic social teachings. What would Jesus do? And so it's about, I think, opening your heart and your soul and what would you want to happen to your family if you were in our situation. And I really appreciate being given the platform tonight to be able to hopefully help people to understand a little bit more. And I thank you so much, Melissa. I think I'm going to be in touch with you.
Thank you both, Melissa and Sherry. It's been fantastic. We're going to have to wind up very soon. We've run out of time. Just before we do finish, I'd like to point everyone in the direction of some resources that might support discussions in your parish or your community. So the Catholic Social Services Victoria website hosts a page titled Reconciliation in Australia, which contains links and documents with further information. And the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Catholic Council, or NATSIC, have a fantastic kitchen table resource that will be published in the next week. So we look forward to seeing you all on the last Thursday of next month, the 29th of June, to hear from Father Frank Brennan, and he will be discussing how Catholic social teaching might be applied to the question of the referendum. So thank you again, both Melissa and Sherry. It's been amazing, and thank you for your time this evening to everybody else. We'll see you then.
Blessings.